21. Um, so I want to start by just sharing my favorite story about equanimity. I haven't told it for a really long time, but I heard this story from a dear friend who has since passed away, Warren Bennis. And I think he got it from CNN. And it's a story about a New Yorker reporter who was embedded with an army, with the army during the war in Iraq. And the story takes place in the city of Najaf. And the scene is that the American soldiers were advancing down a street at the end of which is a mosque. And so what happened, it was a small unit of soldiers that were walking down the street. And the Iraqis, when they saw this, they just started pouring out of all the buildings around, and they were really angry. They were waving their fists and shouting and pressing in on the Americans, who looked at each other in terror, not knowing quite what to do. And the Iraqis were just shrieking and frantic with rage. And the reporter thought, oh no, this is it. Someone's going to fire a shot and we're going to have the Iraq version of the My Lai massacre that happened in Vietnam. And right at that moment, an American officer walked up from the back, and he was holding his rifle really high like this, with the barrel pointing down toward the ground. And so he walked with this kind of unusual gesture to the front, and he said to the soldiers, and he was very, you couldn't read him behind his surfer sunglasses. He looked completely calm. And he just said, take a knee. And they all kind of looked at each other like, really? And then in their heavy, sort of swaying, bulky armor and everything else they wore and carried, they all got down on the ground and took a knee and held their rifles like this, with the barrels pointing to the ground. And as they did this, one after another, of course the Iraqis calmed down and everything got quiet. And so when the crowd got silent and the officer ordered the men to withdraw. And so this was, to me, an amazing demonstration of somebody having the presence of mind to act in a creative way that diffused a conflict, completely diffused a conflict. And so the officer in charge was named Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hughes, and the reporter tracked him down months later where he lived at his home in Iowa, and basically asked him, like, how did you think to do that? How did that come to you to do that? And he said, well, it was simply a gesture of respect. And, to him, it was a natural gesture of respect. That's all. And after that experience, the then chief of staff, who was new at that time, General Shinseki, acknowledged, he said, all of our training manuals are basically meaningless and inadequate. And so this is what we're doing here. This is our training manual, to quietly sit and bring our minds back to this present moment, whether we like it or not, whether it's a pleasant moment or an unpleasant moment. It is what is here. It is the landscape of our life in this particular moment of all eternity. Here we are. And this work of just patiently, over and over, you probably did it this morning, you're listening to the phrases which make it easier to stay focused, but then there's the silence. And what happens in the silence? The mind drifts away inevitably. So this is really what we're doing here, training in self-composure, training in equanimity, and we do it in ways that, equanimity is kind of a big fancy word. It's very grand and kind of majestic way to be. But we do it just moment with our simple mindfulness practice. Being willing to feel what's here, to see, hear, taste, touch, smell, be aware of what we're thinking and feeling, and all of our senses are open to. And to be aware in this particular way where we are practicing letting go of our picking and choosing moments, which ones we like and which ones we don't like, and welcoming the ones we like and savoring them and reveling in them, and then disliking the ones that are unpleasant and trying to get aggressive with them and push them away and rebel against them. How can this be? So this is what we're practicing over and over. And the view of a calm and spacious heart is more it's more panoramic. It's more big picture. It's more the willingness to see, oh, this is how life is. This is how things are right at this moment. And to be willing to be present with them just as they are. We can define equanimity. One definition would be this willingness to just be present with all of our experience as it appears and disappears and changes and flows through us, and to be present without interfering. And that doesn't mean that we never take action in our lives. It means that we're willing to be with it as it is in a particular way that is calm and at least willing, if not totally calm, willing to be with the turmoil if it's not calm at all. And that willingness to be with things as they are frees our hearts to actually take action that's wiser than it would be what we would do in the grip of total emotional reactivity. So it's really a way of freeing our hearts to practice this and to realize that, there's an example that's used in the ancient texts of the teaspoon of salt. If you put a teaspoon of salt in a cup of water and you drink it, it's what? Salty, exactly. But if you put a teaspoon of salt, let's say, in the bathtub and taste it, would you taste it? If you put it in a lake and tasted it, even harder. Same with a pebble. If you throw a pebble into like a cup, it'll splash. If you throw it into the bathtub, there'll be ripples, but it isn't going to overflow. And, the wider we can make the pool, the space of awareness, the wider we can do it, the less we take things so personally, the less we get caught in our ego's sort of petty reactions to things and just being concerned with ourselves and more limited view of things. This is actually, it's a way to overcome all kinds of prejudice that we hold in our hearts and to begin to look at things more openly and more equally. It's an antidote to our ego's fragility and thin-skinnedness and readiness to take offense at things. Practicing being patient with experience and willing to just feel it as it is, to drink it straight up, right? This is, it really is a way to help overcome the prejudice and biases that we have. And I told the story a while ago. I don't know if I had come back from the blessing of a retreat at Ram Dass's house, a semi-retreat, because his caregiver, beloved caregiver, Dasima, and I would get up at dawn and go right away to swim so that she could be back by 8 o'clock to help him get ready for his day and, get up and everything. And so this one morning, we went to where we would swim each morning, and there was a triangle fin in the water. And there were actually two of them, but I couldn't figure out. At first I thought, well, that's a funny fish. It's got two fins on its back. But then we realized the fish was moving in this certain way that you just had to remember that scene in Jaws. Anyway, don't remember it. Don't remember it. But Dasima, who lives there, said, that's a shark. And we were in the water about up to our knees at that point. We just stayed that way, about up to our knees. And then it swam away, and we actually did get in the water. This is an important part of the story, that we got in the water. We were brave. She wants you to know that we got in the water. Because she was actually the more scared, because she lives there and knows what lives in the water better than I do. But when we got back in the water, really, I wanted to swim out and just swim the way we usually do. And she was nervous. And I realized that was not equanimity on my part. It was denial. It was ignorance. It was other things that might masquerade as being calm and equanimous, but it wasn't. So another part of our practice is being honest with ourselves about what we're up to and what it means. We try to unravel the stories that we tell ourselves to see which ones are more accurate and which ones aren't so accurate. And the teachings, they name what they're called the 8 worldly winds, the things that sort of pick us up and spin us around. And classically, they are gain and loss, and pleasure and pain, and success and failure. And the classical words are fame and ill repute. But you can think of it as, being admired or respected, and then falling into no longer being admired and respected. And when these things happen to us, any of them, we get quite consumed by them. The mind goes around and we replay the scenarios and whose fault, who's to blame. We get really, really consumed with them. And equanimity, this practice, is about how do we find our balance. We're always going to feel glad, sad, welcoming some experiences, dreading other experiences. This is our human life, right? We're going to feel that way. So equanimity doesn't mean that we live in this little narrow band of always calmness. And we recognize that's not genuine when we see it. We've all had the experience of being around a loved one or a friend or somebody who's having a hard time, obviously having a hard time, and saying, hey, seems like something's going on. What's up? And the person's like, nothing. Nothing. No, nothing. I'm fine. That's not equanimity. That's something else, right? That's something else. So I have to get used to our new schedule here and see where we are. So how do we be with our own changing, ever-changing states of mind and heart in such a way that we're learning about who we are and what makes us tick? This is important. This is how equanimity involves observing, and observing with the intention to understand rather than to judge. And this is really, really, important because we are constantly judging things. And again, it's not that isn't going to appear in our consciousness, but we have a choice. We can observe and be aware of what's happening, or we can get completely lost and identified in it. And that is, that's the route to suffering or unhappiness. But the more we learn about ourselves and the more we observe ourselves with that mindful awareness, that intention to learn, the more we can be present with other people and their ups and downs and their various states. And, I have a friend back east who was diagnosed with something terrible. And I learned a lot of wise things to sit here and say. Easy to say to you, right? But when I'm upset because I'm upset about possibly, definitely at some point, losing my friend sooner rather than later, how do I practice equanimity then in such a way that I can be with her without radiating either my fear or my sadness or the things that would just be exhausting to have to be with if I was already not well and people are coming to visit me and projecting, all these fears and things onto me. How can I be with her without doing that? And it comes back to just these simple practices that we do. So simple, it's hard to believe how powerful they are. Like just feeling the contact of the hands wherever they are on your lap and your feet wherever they are on the floor or the mat or the cushion. Just feeling the breath in our body, just sprinkling a little love and joy on our experience as we feel it, no matter what it is, through our willingness to be present with it. That's it. It's really simple, not easy to do. There's a Zen saying that an 8-year-old can understand it, but an 80-year-old can't do it. It's hard. That's why we call it a practice, right? What is it? Progress, not perfection. That's why we talk about it that way. So I'd like to open up to you and questions that you might have, either about doing the practice that Jack led earlier or anything that may be coming up in your experience that you have found a way to work with or are curious about how to work with. And for people who need to leave early, I just want to remind you of the donation bowl in the lobby to please support us, especially at this time of uncertainty for our center, where we're going to be long term. We're going to be here for a while, don't worry. It takes time to find another space anywhere near here. Yeah. So, Lee?
Yeah. Thank you. This is very personal, but I'm struggling with it. And I actually taught a yoga and meditation class this morning before I came here at an assisted living facility. And I had to maintain a lot of equanimity while I did that. So what's coming up for me personally, and I'm trying to figure out how to apply this practice to it, is I have feelings around an old trauma that happened between me and my brother many years ago. I won't get into the details.
Thank you.
And the Jewish New Year is coming up, and I went to a Slihot service last night, and that has to do with forgiveness. And ever since I went to that service last night, when you said, I'm struggling with equanimity about what happened and the old feelings that are coming up. So maybe you can say a few things about how you practice equanimity when a lot of old painful things come up.
I just also want to acknowledge that within your question is the answer. I know you probably don't want to hear that because, it'd be great if we could just fix it for you. Wouldn't that be good? We could go back and make your brother do something much nicer, but we can't. But you talked about just how do I be with these things that are coming up? And that's how you be with the things that are coming up. You ask, how can I do this? Is it through the simple focus on the here and now to the, just kind of relentless exclusion of everything else for a while? Just what's happening here and now. When my friend got diagnosed, I talked to a friend here who's a nurse about it. And she said to me, I mean, this is different, but applicable maybe. She said to me, people with cancer are awake. And sometimes it seems to me that everybody else is asleep. She said they're awake because they have to focus on what I can do today. What am I able to do today? Don't know if I'll be able to do that tomorrow, but I can do it today. This thing, whatever it is, breathe in, breathe out, whatever it is. So staying in the present, reminding ourselves that this is now, that was then. But at the same time, especially if it's something that maybe you weren't aware of what it really was at the time because you were a kid, and maybe now you understand more fully, and so the feelings come up in a whole different way. But those feelings are really messengers of what's true for you. So to also, point your gun barrel at the ground, not out at others, right? But at the same time, I think we have to bow, really take a knee to those and respect those feelings. And get help from a trauma therapist. That's sometimes, you know what I mean? Sometimes we need our meditative tools, but also our Western psychology tools. You know that. Yeah. Thank you.
I want to thank you for the subject matter today, which was right on target. And I also want to thank you, Trudy, for recommending the Daryl Hammond film.
Oh, you went?
Well, I couldn't go to yours. It was full. But there were only 4 people at the 150 presentation on Friday. I was one of them. And
you went to like an earlier show?
Yeah, I couldn't get into the one you did.
Yeah.
But yeah. You recommended it, and I'm in the field. I work with it, and I've also had a whole lot of trauma.
It's a movie about trauma.
It's called Cracked Up, and it's about Daryl Hammond's journey, and it's really what we're talking about how he found equanimity after being misdiagnosed for decades, and finally finding a trauma therapist who nailed it. And to me, the movie just nailed trauma. She did a beautiful job, didn't she? So I wouldn't have known about it had you not told me about it. And
it's there for a week, right?
Please don't miss this film. It's just magnificent. If you've ever had trauma yourself, it just crystal clear about.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Kristen again. I have a question for Jack about your comment about how we have the knowledge that we're not safe and that we're not secure. How do we not turn that into feeling unsafe and insecure and having a fear response to that?
A great question. My teacher called it the wisdom of uncertainty, because you were just saying, how do we not turn it into those feelings of feeling uncertain or insecure? You'll have them. And you say, okay, those feelings are present. And the worry, which usually comes with a story, it's not just a feeling. It actually has a little story. You know the whole thing from Mark Twain. My life's been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened, right? You can say, thank you for trying to protect me, because that's really what they're doing. Let's worry about this and try and keep us safe, even though the thoughts don't do. Thank you for trying to protect me. I'm okay for now. It's a little bit what Trudy was talking about, of actually being where you are. You don't deny the feelings. They're part of being human. They're part of the, brain stem. Let's look for, dangers. Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you. I'm okay for now. Just that simple. You don't have to get rid of anything. This is how we live. We don't know, actually. Things are uncertain. And so it's the wisdom of uncertainty that just says yes, and here we are this moment. And then you know how to respond because you're here rather than someplace else.
Thank you. Is it on?
The phrases that you use, where might we find them? Because I find those phrases really helpful. Just as it took me a while to learn the mindful self-compassion phrases and loving kindness phrases, I find that using these phrases in the empty space of and sort of struggling with thoughts that keep coming in, they help diffuse that, and I can go back to them. At least that's been my experience.
So there are a lot of places you can find them, and there's variation. So you want to actually find what works. I have this book, The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness, and Peace, that has some of these phrases, not exactly the ones I use today, but close. Sharon Salzberg has a beautiful book, a metta,
Loving Kindness, the
which has
revolutionary art of happiness.
And if you go online, there's lots of other versions. What's really important is to listen and then find those words that speak really from your heart or what's true for you, so you can play with them.
Thank you.
Angela, do we have any questions from the live stream folks?
Somebody was just asking again for the name of the film, which I'm typing.
Yeah, great. Cracked up. Michelle Ezrick is the director. Tor?
Yeah. I wonder if either of you could speak to what I'm hearing in your explanations is a change of focus. On the one hand, you're focusing very closely on where you are here and now, which is very precise and a little bit limited. And on the other hand, you're saying, oh, but we have this entire lake and just one little teaspoon of salt. And this expansiveness where things kind of get a different perspective. And it seems like there's a tension between those two, because you want to be grounded, but at the same time, you don't want to lose the big perspective, because you'll end up getting all. Could you talk a little bit more to that, please?
Do you want to, Jack?
Sure. So remember, I used that poetic line from T.S. Eliot where he says, teach us to care and not to care. Or Ram Dass, who will sometimes say, remember your Buddha nature and your social security number. That we live in the kind of paradox in which we have to tend the uniqueness of our life, the family, the community, the order of things. You have to drive on the right-hand side of the road in this country, or you crash immediately or die or whatever. And yet there also is a bigger perspective. And so part of what being present with meditation of loving awareness that we practice here is the ability to be present for life and at the same time have a sense of the vastness of space and time. And that's possible for us. It's one of the, kind of remarkable things about our human life, that we can be present for it and we also can have perspective. And you probably know this in your life. At times there are ways that you know it very well. And so we're nurturing that, really.
Thank you both. I'm fairly self-aware, gone through a lot of practice, been sitting a long time, but I get so blindsided.
Hold the mic a little closer.
Yeah. I just get completely blindsided when something either fear or anger comes in, and here I am, I think I'm in that equanimity state, and then I see myself react. And it's like, what do you do when you want to pause that one little moment before you react, or before I react? What can I do, I should say?
Well, again, your answer is in your question. And I love when that happens, because everybody has wisdom. We just don't have the confidence in our wisdom a lot of the time. But when you talked about that little moment of pause before you lash out or shoot somebody, or whatever you feel like doing, that moment of pause is where we buy our freedom, because the moment of pause, just to even know, oh my God, I am so triggered right now, that's awareness. And the mind that notices is not totally caught up in it. And it's funny, because during the Q&A the panel that I moderated, after the showing Friday night of Cracked Up, of the film, one of the questions that I asked Daryl was, there are a lot of, we all get reactive. We all get set off by things. So how do you handle it now when it gets really bad? You're having a bad day or how do you do that? And what he said first was really interesting. He said, I call a friend. He said there are like 2 or 3 people that I can always call. And so we forget about that sometimes, our refuge in Sangha or community. It's not all up to us to do it all ourselves. Yes, we can pause. Yes, we can reflect. Yes, we can be mindful. But sometimes we just need to call a friend too, if it's something that really got under our skin. Thank you.
I'm struggling right now. My husband passed away 2.5 months ago.
Right.
We were married 48 years, and I am having a terrible time with the sadness and pain.
Yeah. What are you doing?
What am I doing?
Yeah, when you have when you get a wave of it that's
yeah.
just so intense, what do you do?
I cry.
Good. You're probably crying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's so fresh.
Yes, it's very fresh. And I do notice that when I'm distracted, I'm better. But when I have those moments of quietness, it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how to handle it. It's just too much.
One way to look at it, I don't know if this would be helpful, is that like the intensity of your tears and your pain of this loss is a tribute to how much you love him. And one of the things that we're kind of taught in our snap out of it culture, you've got another half month, by the way,
Right.
and then we're going to call you depressed.
Yes.
Instead of, and then we'll offer you medications.
Right. You can call me that now. It's
Instead
okay.
instead of just saying you're grieving,
Yes,
you're in the
yes.
throes of heartbreak,
Yes.
and we forget that you don't have to say goodbye to him. Everyone will tell you, let it go and letting go. You don't have to. I think that it's really beautiful to keep him alive in your consciousness as in every way that you can. Like even, so my mom, after my dad died, they were also together like their whole lives. And when she would go to sleep, she would imagine trips they had taken or, fun things they did. And she would just do them again. She said, well, and I was like, oh, so where did you go last night? Now this was later in her process. It was not when it was super fresh. Mm-hmm. But you can do a kind of loving kindness practice where you imagine him the way he looked at you when he was happy with you, and the warmth in his eyes and that positive regard and affection and love that he had for you. And evoke that, feel that, because that's what he would give to you now if he were here. He would comfort you. Mm-hmm. So you can use him as kind of like a bridge to comforting yourself, because it's too lonesome to have to comfort yourself, right? So use your imagination. I think I talked about this a few weeks ago. I don't know if you were there, but about how we can use our imagination creatively in the practice, especially when we're practicing loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity. And one of the hallmarks of grief is that it just drains the meaning out of everything else. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
The things you used to enjoy, like
Right.
sawdust,
Yes.
even the things you liked to eat, or it just drains all of that away.
Right.
So to make a conscious effort when you can to redirect your mind from the if onlys or what ifs or that kind of that use of the imagination, which is not helpful, to redirect it to even the things that don't feel good now, but you know they used to, and just reminding yourself, I will enjoy this again.
Do you think it's there's any good that comes out of making myself participate a little bit in life?
Yes,
Yes.
I do.
It's a struggle. It's
Yes.
really a struggle.
It's a struggle because you feel completely exiled from what's going on around you. Everyone's on a totally different wavelength. You're going through the motions.
Yes.
Your heart is not in it.
Right.
But there's an expression, fake it till you make it. It's important to push yourself to have a little bit of connection and contact with people.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, also that you're here. So I had a question about like when it comes to other people, and it's like, well, their thoughts and suffering is responsible for their happiness, and their thoughts and actions are responsible for their happiness and suffering.
Yeah.
When that person is close to you, and there's like a wave of blame coming at you, and you know, you understand, you're trying to see what their wish is behind that, what they want, or what, you know, and you're trying to like be aware of your own reactivity. I don't know. I think there's a fine line between being like, well, that's your thoughts and actions, and just not saying anything, but then saying like, hey, maybe you do need help, or maybe you do, you know, giving advice but not wanting to control it. I don't know, where's the fine line? Because then it's like, well, is that control? Is that not?
Well, that phrase is to help us when we lose our boundaries and get burned out, either as a helper, because professionally, you know, we're a clinician or a helper of some kind, or because the person in question, maybe they're an addict and they keep going back to that which is harmful and destructive. We can't help them by telling them not to. It doesn't work. So that phrase is to calm you down, Rona. It's for you to recognize, okay, I'm over here, I'm me, you're there, you're you. Your happiness or unhappiness does not depend on what I want for you or say to you. It depends on what you choose to do. Now, if it's your child or something, this is not appropriate. This is for people who, you know, can actually make the choices in their life. They're adults. But I think to keep in mind, that phrase is to help you keep your balance. And maybe when you have kept your balance, you'll see the right thing to do is to say, hey, I think you need help. Therapy can really address this and help you, us, whatever. Do you know, maybe that's the right thing to say, but when you're coming, when what you say or do flows from a place of more calm and balance, it will be more useful. Does that make sense? Does that clarify?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
It's just in the moment. Sometimes it's like, is it coming from fear or calm, or, you know, it's
in
a
the
journey,
moment,
I guess.
We have to forgive ourselves for everything. Okay, so let's just sit for a minute.